Hi. Well, I'm here with Jakob. It's my pleasure to be here in London with him. We've been working together for quite a while, haven't we? And you are the man who wrote the Auctions book, which I am very excited about. That book being translated into our technology. So just a bit of background about me. We know each other for a while. I'm actually an ex-banker. I went straight into finance at a university in London, and then I was out to New York and Mexico City. I used to trade equity derivatives before I made the plunge into procurement, so quite a big change for me. But no, I'm fascinated by auctions. I mean, I think it's fundamental to price discovery in the market. So I'm super keen to both see it in the product that we've developed and also to harness some of your expert knowledge around how it fits within the procurement market.
But I'm very happy to be here. So I'm Gorm Larsen. As you said, I've worked within the procurement industry for about 20 years now. Most of the time for the global shipping company called Maersk, where I, for the last 5 years, headed up their digital procurement function. But where I've actually spent most of my time over the last decade is in the area of auctions. So building up their auction program, rolling it out into a global organization across a number of different industries. And that also resulted then in the book, which came out here about a year and a half ago. And as you said, it's been, for me, extremely exciting to work with you guys at the DeepStream team, seeing a lot of my thinking and ideas being converted into the technology has been a selfishly very rewarding process, I would say.
Yeah. So. And if I may, when you went into auctions, right? So the CPO procurement officer role, I mean, obviously auctions are super cool, right? But apart from that, what made you make the leap, right, into going fully into the auctions technology within procurement?
I think it was a number of things. The need for a new challenge, the constant fascination of that you can do more within this space and only work within the space of digital sourcing was the main motivational driver. So I saw a professional opportunity and also the need for, I think, a new personal challenge.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I would have been straight into auctions if I'd been a procurement officer, obviously. But no, that's really, really good to hear. And it's a pleasure to be here with you. All right, so recession. Recession is coming. It is a bit of a bloodbath on the market right now. Everyone is talking about it. It's a double whammy. I've been saying inflation is going to kick off at some point with all the quantitative easing and the money that's been ploughed into the economy. But we seem to have a double hammer coming on the horizon, both inflation and also general recession from a macro environment. So clearly, from my perspective, when I look at the procurement market, procurement is as much of a profit generation center as the sales guys at businesses, right? The amount of cash that goes out of the door for businesses is super material to the bottom line, especially in industrial companies. So, that's, I mean, for me personally, one of the reasons I'm super, super excited about how auctions are going to be adopted by the market as almost a defense mechanism to counter the broader macro elements. Because we are going to see companies going bust, right? That is just the nature of the beast. And I think, for me, using this tool as a way to counteract the negative effects which you're seeing both on the inflationary side and the general macro downturn of business is key. But what are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. So this, the recession which is coming will bring procurement even more to the forefront in many organizations. There will be a huge ask for generating cash and cost savings, turning every stone to deliver a cost savings to sort of preserve and protect the companies as we go into a recession. And when you've been in the industry for many years, you've seen it before. And I recall back in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, that was actually when we first introduced auctions at scale and saw the power and the potential that the technology could bring. So I don't believe there's any more efficient way of turning all your spend and negotiating it efficiently and generating cost savings for a company. So as we said, never waste a good crisis to.
Yeah, exactly. The silver linings and everything.
Yes.
And do you, like, give me an insight into the procurement officer's mind, right? So do they realize that they are, as important from a profit basis for their businesses as the salespeople? Or, I always try and get into their minds in terms of understanding, from a user perspective and a business perspective. Do they understand that, sales, they sometimes get the glory, they get the cash in, but do procurement teams all realize that they are as important as those sales guys from a profit perspective?
I think most of them understand the importance, especially when you go through a situation like this, because it's all eyes on securing cost savings. I think the really smart ones also realize the opportunity that technology brings in a situation like this, and then uses this crisis to also change a few things, introduce technology across a number of processes, so that you're not only getting the short-term impact, but that you actually get some kind of transformation of your function so that it becomes more digital. And that's the smart ones that are linking the use of technology to addressing the crisis.
And do you think auctions in particular, do you think it requires a top-down kind of managerial, diktat, right, for them to implement this kind of strategy? Or do you think that actually happens at the individual procurement user level, that they say, one of my big KPIs is reduce cost. There's this really, really cool, effective technology out there that allows me to do so I'm going to go and do it? Or do you think it requires a kind of digital transformation of the entire business for them to actually engage?
I think it requires support. And of course, there's a difference between a hard mandate and support from the CPO. I've never seen a successful program who did not have the support of the CPO. I've also seen mandates being installed, and I'm not a big fan of that. So I think you need active support, and then you need somebody to drive it, somebody who's constantly pushing the organization to apply it with that support or that hammer in the backhand coming from the CPO level. But there's a difference between mandate and support, and I'm more in favor of the supportive role from the CPO.
Interesting. I mean, I know it from again, when I was in banking on the trading side, the last thing I'd want is to get bid out and put into a competitive situation, especially auctions, because ultimately it would make sure that I gave my true price and my true market price to my counterparty, right? And so sometimes we used to try and avoid that, right? Not being in competitive situations, because we knew, right, that our counterparty would get such a better deal from us often, right, than if we were just in a bilateral or traditional negotiation with counterparty. How does that reflect in the procurement market?
That happens all the time. So you would see, of course, especially incumbent suppliers taking a lot of steps and measures, not only right before, but that could be months in advance, taking steps, communicating, influencing the category manager, even the CPO, towards let's not go down that route of auctions. And of course, that's because they know the auction creates an environment where they'll reveal their true market price, and you'll simply get a better deal if you're a procurement person. So the negotiation from a supplier side starts months in advance, and the first step in that is avoiding getting into this competitive situation.
But you one thing you mentioned earlier when we were having a discussion, you mentioned you thought that was actually wrong, right, from a supplier's perspective. You thought that actually introducing auctions technology and having a more transparent, visible, and market-driven approach to the procurement market actually served in the best interest over time for suppliers. Do you mind explaining that a bit further?
Absolutely. So my point with that is that our counter when suppliers are trying to get out of it, there is actually a number of benefits for suppliers in participating in auctions. They get access to real market feedback. Often they don't get access to that. They get faster negotiations done, so less time invested in the negotiation process. But most importantly, we put the fate of this deal at the hand of the supplier. They make the decision on whether they're in or out, whether they want to continue bidding or whether they want to drop out. So there's a number of benefits that we as procurement organizations need to articulate towards the suppliers so that they understand why we are doing it, but also the benefits for them. At the end of the day, I would argue that the main benefit for suppliers is that an auction secures a transparent and fair negotiation process. And with fair, I mean it is the best man, the best supplier who will win the deal. It's not a personal relationship, the size of a Christmas gift or whatever could influence the decision that drives the outcome. It's the guy with the best offer to make that will get the contract.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. And I guess going back to the buyer's side of the equation, right, especially given the upcoming macro environment, right, both inflation and cost pressure, right, there's a lot of numbers flying around there, right? We did some work with McKinsey and they said 15 to 21% was what you could expect to save running auctions versus not, right? I know from your book, you had some similar numbers, right? I think one of them was 53% of transactions would achieve double-digit savings, right? For me, when I hear those numbers, I feel there's madness not to be able to adopt or not to adopt this technology, right? But bring me again into the mindset of why there's some reticence sometimes, and do you think that reticence is going to fall away given this? Is it going to require this macro climate for businesses to adopt, or do you think that's going to be insignificant?
So I think if we look back over the last 25 years where auctions has been part of the procurement toolbox, there is a correlation between the economic climate and the adoption of auctions. So during the financial crisis, we saw a huge uptake of auctions, and actually the beginning of the COVID pandemic, a similar uptake. And then as markets turns, adoption goes up and down following that climate. I think that's very human. Obviously, I don't have the insights behind the McKinsey numbers you're referring to, but it doesn't sound far off. If you haven't done auctions before, I would be very, very surprised if your savings are not sort of within that range as well. As you said, in Maersk, we did thousands and thousands of auctions. And about 10 years into the program, half of the auctions were still yielding double-digit savings. That's a significant achievement considering we've done it over and over again.
So Jakob, I mean, obviously you'd expect me to say this, but it feels like auctions are a kind of silver bullet for the market. But tell me, where do they not work, right? So in procurement, procurement departments, like where would it not be a good idea to run an auction strategy? Like how wide is that as a piece of the pie?
So I typically use two criteria to look at applicability for auctions. And the first one, it's actually both, it's just describing the market situation. So overall, I would look at the market to determine whether it's applicable. And the market then being defined as, one, you need competition, so you need more than one supplier. And secondly, you need attractive business. So there needs to be some kind of supplier interest in order to run auctions. If you can't say yes to those two things, in general, you shouldn't consider auctions. So that could be monopoly markets, of course. If you don't have a market, you can't run a market-driven negotiation form. If you don't have attractive business, i.e. if you're in more need of getting the goods than the suppliers are in selling it, then you should also be hesitant in applying auctions.
Okay, but in terms of like, what percentage of the pie roughly is that? I mean, it doesn't feel like a very large slug of the pie, right? I'm just trying to get a sense of the applicability of auctions for the day-to-day running of procurement departments.
And it varies from company to company with how much you can push through of auctions. The rule of thumb, as I've said, is anything north of 10% of your spend. If you can address that with auctions, you're actually doing a pretty good job. That's another misunderstanding, that it seems to be sort of a black or white discussion. Either we do auctions or everything, or we don't do it at all. But there is a decision to be made. There are things to be looked at. And if you can apply it on 10, 15% of your spend, overall you're doing quite well.
Got it. And in terms of, I know we've obviously put a huge amount of R&D and effort on a DeepStream side for developing our auctions tool and also meshing it in with how we see ourselves as a tech product first business in terms of being incredibly user friendly, incredibly clean, and results driven. But you've been working with our product team quite closely. So I guess, are there any insights that you can share around how that process went whilst we developed the product? And also, auctions, let's be honest, they've been around for a while, right? So how have other companies approached it, and where do you think they've gone wrong in terms of getting a very solid and usable product out to market?
So I think first of all, it's been, for me, as I said initially, a very good process, very interesting process. So I had a lot of practical experience. Of course, I have my book with some of the concepts I've introduced there. And then going through a process where we see that translated into technology has been really exciting for me as well. And I think a couple of the things where we've been successful, or the product team has been successful, has been in terms of continuing down this usability track. So creating a solution which is easy to use for the end users. I think that's a key parameter for any successful solution. Another thing which I really like about the end product is that it sort of take into account the whole question and the process around auction strategy from the outset. So it has the finger mark of procurement practitioners and how you want to run auctions as a procurement practitioner. It's not an engineering-driven process. It's more a user-driven and strategy-driven process. And I think that is coming through quite well in the end product.
That's great to hear. I mean, the amount of products we see that are just incredibly bloated, almost engineering focused. It's like an engineer has just put it together. And the end result that we see is people don't actually use the product, right? So it's really, really good to hear that we've kind of stuck by some of our principles of having a very clean and usable product, because ultimately there's humans behind it, and humans will not use stuff that is too complicated, or they require months of training to get to grips with.
Absolutely. And again, also one of the common mistakes with auctions, and that's not related to technology, but in general, is to consider it a very transactional methodology or negotiation method. And a lot of practitioners don't get into the strategy piece. So doing a negotiation as an auction, you need to have a strategy. And that is clearly reflected within the DeepStream solution. So this auction strategy process that I developed as part of writing my book, we've sort of converted that into the technology, starting with a clear description and definition of the awarding criteria, and then all the different mechanisms that you can set are coming afterwards, guiding the user through to the optimal auction strategy.
As you know, we have massive ambitions in terms of iterating, as we always do with our products, the auctions module that we're soon to be releasing. We started off, as you know, with the English auction, right? We're going to be releasing additional types of auctions, right, to cater for different use cases. But the first strategy which we're deploying within our module is the English auction. So can you talk me through a bit around why that is, I guess, the foundation block for a good and best practices auction strategy within a product, and then go on around some of the other auction strategies which you've got in the pipeline for clients?
Yeah, so the English reverse auction format is the most commonly used auction format, I think, in history. It was also the original format introduced by free markets plus 25 years ago. So it's and the English reverse auction format is very efficient because it drives a number of things. First of all, it's sequential bidding, meaning that suppliers place a bid, get feedback, and then have the chance to place a new bid, like we see in any normal auction format or forward auction. It gives them then the comfort that where they are in competition, it gives them the security that there are other bidders still actively bidding, and that then creates an incentive for lowering their bid. So it stimulates competition quite well. It also gives them transparency and market insights, so suppliers will have a fairly good understanding of the level of competition in a format like this. And then I would say the value add of an English reverse auction is also well described and recognized latest here in 2020 with the Nobel Prize to Wilson and Milgram for their contribution to what is referred to as the common value paradigm, or the winner's curse, which the English reverse auction format is very efficient at addressing.
Interesting. And in terms of, one thing which we try and do at DeepStream is, obviously we're a technology provider, we're a product provider, but one thing which we do with our clients, and we try and embed it within the application, is a transfusion of best practices and kind of market knowledge around how to engage in procurement operations in the most optimal way. So that the product isn't just a tool, right? It's actually something that is a valuable asset for all procurement teams and departments out there. So can you walk me through a bit around how that is applicable to auctions? Because some people think auctions might be a bit scary, they might be a bit complicated, but actually deploying a product which not only is incredibly easy to use, but also has some kind of educational quality to it to guide users in being able to execute on their strategy without training or having a high amount of knowledge of the actual auction strategy themselves all the time.
Let me give you one example of that sort of embedding of best practice into the technology as well. And it's linked to one of the, I think, bad practices that also exist around use of auctions. And that's the whole question or dilemma around commitment to the process. So one of the reasons why some suppliers would have reservations against auctions is that it's a very transparent process. They go through it, they see they win it, and then they don't get the business. The buyer changes his mind or have all along knew that I want to award this to a certain supplier. That creates a pushback because you get the perception that you are basically wasting your time as a supplier by participating in a process like that. You're just being leveraged for pushing someone else. That's a bad practice that you want to avoid, because in the long run, that kind of resistance will prevent your suppliers from participating. And in the product, we've embedded a step around awarding. So as a buyer, you describe, make it visible, transparent, also to the suppliers, how you intend to award this business. And that's rule number one if you want to drive a sustainable auction program, is that you have credibility around the process around the auction as a negotiation method. And the best way of doing that is by being clear upfront. We do this, and this is how we're going to award business. You share it with suppliers, and afterwards, of course, you follow through on that commitment. And in DeepStream, we've built it into the platform so that you describe and articulate the awarding principles and also share it with suppliers. And that's an example of embedding best practice into the technology, which I'm not sure we've seen in any other platforms in the market.
That's really, really good to hear. I mean, one of the things that I've heard a lot is, to run these, people perceive these strategies to be complex, and they perceive that potentially only really large organizations have the capability and the knowledge to be able to execute on strategies such as auctions for their procurement department. So it's only for the big boys out there, right? And I think from our perspective, we have a lot of very high growth companies on our platform some of them are starting up quite small and they're expanding rapidly. How important do you think product, right, in today's market, right, you have this scalable, accessible product that carries with it not just technology, but it carries with it embedded guidance for companies that might not be able to execute that strategy without it? Like, how important do you think this nascent technology is to allow more users and businesses to take advantage of this kind of product out there?
But it's absolutely essential because, the big boys, as you call them, they would have the resources and the money to hire in people like me who can then provide the capabilities. But if you're a small company or smaller company growing a lot, you probably don't have the resource, don't want to invest your resources into building exactly that capability. So getting it embedded with the technology is more or less a prerequisite for being successful with a program like this. That in combination with, again, the usability, so that every buyer or ultimately every employee who has a negotiation could run this on their own, I think is essential, and it brings forward a lot of perspectives on the future of technologies like this, because it's not necessarily limited to procurement if you can embed best practice and procurement processes in it.
That's amazing. I mean, that's music to my ears, because I think a lot of the vision of what we've embarked on, DeepStream, is really democratizing these tools for the market, right? So some tools that only previously would be open to very large corporations who had massive budgets to be able to spend on consultants and hiring in people with not existing knowledge. We're really using products to democratize the availability of these tools so that we can service the entire market in a very scalable way, rather than that just being reserved for the kind of large incumbent businesses out there who can afford to kind of have huge departments and existing experience.
And that's a vision that we share, because that's when I decided to spend my time writing a book on how procurement can become better at adopting auctions. I had a couple of ambitions for it, and one was I wanted to write the book that I would have liked to have received when I started on this journey myself. And secondly, I wanted to spread out this best practice and this experience that I have spent 10 years building up on the journey with Maersk to all other people, so they can benefit from this fantastic method of doing negotiations. And if we can then take that, people don't even have to read the book, but that they can get it embedded in technology, even better, right? Then it comes almost automated, in an automated way, you could say.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I mean, that's great that we share the vision, because I think that's what the market needs, right? I think you've had too long where large businesses have just dominated because of their incumbency and their ability to pay for this knowledge. And one of the beautiful things about technology is you can deploy it in a very scalable way, in a very cost-effective way to multiple businesses. I'm scratching my head, given the kind of savings you can get out of it, the simplicity and the ease of use, why many businesses aren't adopting this. So I guess, what would be your advice to businesses that are on the fence or hesitant about adopting new technology, new digital technology, especially in this current climate?
I think the best piece of advice I can give is actually sharing the motto that we had for this in Maersk. And I also think that's where most organizations get it wrong. So we had the motto that running auctions is a lifestyle, not a diet. So, and that's where people get it wrong. They look at it as a tech implementation. Turn on the tool, we get often external support to run a pilot or two, and then we think all behavior is changed. And that's not the case. That's not going to happen. So it's a lifestyle. It's just as important that you drive adoption with targets, awareness, capability building, new technology in year 5, 6, 8, or 10 as it is in year 1 or 2. It's a change of how we do procurement to do it digitally. It's not a technology that we implement and then it's just running by itself. So it's a lifestyle, not a diet.
I like the lifestyle, yeah. So Jakob, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, speaking to you. Thank you again for all of the kind of collaboration and work. I know I talk for myself and on behalf of the team. they've thoroughly enjoyed working together, and we've learned a huge amount. I never knew that I'd learned so much about auctions and get so excited about it. So just from my perspective, thank you. And also thanks for joining me today at our offices in London, making the journey over here. It's been a pleasure to host you.
But as I've already said a couple of times, the pleasure has been all mine. So I can only repeat that. Thank you to you, Jack, to the team for being so open to take in the input and convert it into a product. For me, selfishly, that has been extremely rewarding and interesting. So pleasure has been mine.
I mean, we looked at the product earlier. It looked pretty snazzy. Yeah. So
we're excited.
The market better watch out, right? So it's looking very cool, and I'm very excited about it. And it's exciting times.
Indeed.